Welcome to Heart of a Shepherd. We are beginning a new study in an Old Testament book today, the Song of Solomon. I've titled the devotional Song of Solomon, a Timeless Love Story. Now our scripture reading, Song of Solomon, chapter 1. Well, today's scripture reading does introduce a new book in our study, and the book bears the name of its author, the Song of Solomon. Now, the Song of Solomon is often seen as a celebration of love between a man and a woman. However, the book also holds messianic significance because it serves as a prophecy and depiction of Christ's millennial reign after his second coming. Now, we will notice throughout the book, Solomon shows a young king's passion and love for a peasant woman he calls a Shulamite. She is introduced that way in chapter 6 and verse 13. Well, Song of Solomon, chapter 1. Now, let's discuss the possible interpretations of this book. Now, it has been suggested that the Song of Solomon can be interpreted in three different ways. Some propose an allegorical interpretation, viewing it as a narrative about God's relationship with his people, Israel. Now, there's others that suggest a typical interpretation, and they believing that the Song of Solomon describes Christ's love and relationship with the church. That's presented in Ephesians 5. Now, for our brief study, however, I advocate a literal interpretation of the Song of Solomon. Now, that means that I see this book as a story of a romance. I believe the Song of Solomon celebrates love and romance between Solomon, the young king, and the woman he loved. And so chapter 1 marks the start of that courtship. Now, the maiden's words to the bridegroom, the king, are recorded in verses 2 through 4. Now, I do agree with some who suggest that King Solomon left his court and royal city, Jerusalem, and disguised himself as a humble shepherd. Well, he traveled northward, and on his journey he noticed a beautiful young woman. We find her described in verse 6 as really a peasant woman who was working in a vineyard leased by her family, perhaps from King Solomon himself. Now, the young woman is later identified, as I've already mentioned in chapter 6 and verse 13, as a Shulamite. Now, that means that she's possibly from a town in the district of Shunem, which would have been in northern Israel, and, of course, far from Jerusalem and Solomon's palace. And so we understand that the young woman did not recognize King Solomon, and judging by his attire, she probably thought he was a shepherd and of a similar social standing. Well, like many young women dreaming of love, she felt flattered and shy because of the man's attention. Now, in verses 5 through 7, we have the maiden's confession and wonder. Now, she, mindful that her skin was tanned by the Middle Eastern sun, she thought to herself in verse 5, I am black but comely. I'm black but beautiful. O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, that being Bedouin shepherds, as the curtains of Solomon. In verse 6, look not upon me, because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children, that is not her brothers, but her stepbrothers, were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, that being another vineyard, perhaps the king's. But mine own vineyard have I not kept. She was obviously an impoverished young woman. Now she dreamed of meeting the shepherd again and wondered where his flocks grazed, believing the king was the shepherd. Well, we have then in verses 8 through 14, the bridegroom, Solomon, and the maiden's mutual affection. And so we find romance was in the air as she knew their interests were mutual. However, she did not realize that her love interest was Solomon, the king of Israel, verse 9 and verse 15. Now, her affection for the shepherd was described then in verses 9 through 14. And she imagined in verse 16, lying next to the shepherd on a bed of green grasses and dreaming of love with a canopy of cedar and fir branches above their heads. Well, a closing thought. And I would sum it up in this cliche or adage: love is not blind. Now, although their stations in life differed, the king loved the tan-skinned woman who worked in the vineyard. She loved him, though she believed he was a humble shepherd. Now, overlooking the qualities that might have been seen as undesirable, weathered skin and callous hands from hard work, Solomon loved the young woman and focused on her beauty and character. Well, in truth, the negative qualities will inevitably surface in human relationships, whether in friendship, courtship, marriage, or family. Now, you can choose to focus on the negatives or love and overlook them. But remember this, 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 5 says, charity, that is love, thinketh no evil. What a wonderful challenge that is for us as we watch the unfolding of this love story in the next few days. God bless. Thank you for being a part of Heart of a Shepherd, and bye-bye.